Fear sometimes arrives disguised as opportunity, whispering promises while hiding the sharp claws of uncertainty. The train stopped at the small Cedar Falls station with a metallic gasp that echoed across the empty plain. Catherine Miller descended slowly, carrying only a small suitcase of worn leather and a yellowed envelope with the letter that would change her life forever. At the age of 28, she had left behind the sweltering poverty of Boston to marry a man she knew only through words written on cheap paper. The dust danced in lazy circles around her feet as she watched the barren landscape that stretched as far as the eye could see. The late afternoon heat stuck to the skin like an unfulfilled promise, and the dry wind carried the smell of parched earth and abandoned hopes. Billy Thompson was waiting on the other side of the platform, recognizable by the description he had sent in a letter. Tall, thin, with brown hair touched prematurely by the desert sun. But there was something in his eyes that words failed to capture, a deep sadness that seemed to have settled in his soul like dust in the corners of abandoned houses. He approached with hesitant steps, removing his worn hat in a show of courtesy learned in kinder times. Catherine noticed how his hands trembled slightly, and for a moment wondered if he was as frightened as she was. The city that stretched beyond the station was too small to hide secrets, but large enough to harbor untold stories. Sun-painted wooden houses lined a main street that ended in a simple church, its spire pointing to a sky that promised more warmth the next day. Billy finally found the courage to speak, his voice charged with a gentleness that contrasted with the harshness of the surrounding environment. He explained that his property was a few miles from town, a small ranch where he tried to raise enough cattle to survive. The words came out broken, as if he was not used to talking to women, or perhaps to anyone. As they walked toward the wagon that would take them to his property, Catherine noticed other details that the letters had not mentioned. The way Billy avoided looking directly at her, the way his shoulders curved, as if carrying an invisible weight, and most importantly, the absence of any mention of the child that had led him to look for a mail-order wife. The wagon swayed gently along the dusty road, and the silence between them was filled only with the sound of wheels on the hard earth and the occasional creak of old wood. Catherine held tight to the handle of her suitcase, trying not to show the nervousness that grew with each mile traveled toward a future she couldn't fully imagine. It was when they saw the house that Catherine first saw the small figure on the porch, a girl of maybe 6 years old, with disheveled blonde hair and a dress that had seen better days. The child watched his arrival with intense curiosity, partially hidden behind one of the wooden columns that supported the ceiling of the balcony. Billy noticed Catherine's gaze, and his expression became even more serious. He had mentioned in the letters that he needed a wife to take care of the house and help with the work of the ranch. What he had not said was that he also needed a mother for his daughter, who had lost hers to a devastating fever the previous winter. The wagon stopped in front of the simple but well-kept house, and Catherine could feel the girl's eyes examining her every move. There was something about the way the child hid that spoke of a painful shyness, born perhaps of the premature loss of the only person who represented security and unconditional love in his little existence. The afternoon was coming to an end, painting the sky with orange tones that were reflected in the windows of the house. It was a time of transition, not just from day to night, but from a known life to a completely new one. Catherine took a deep breath, feeling the weight of responsibility she had accepted in responding to that first letter from Billy Thompson. As he helped her out of the car, their hands touched briefly, and Catherine noticed the harshness of someone who works hard in the inclement sun. But there was also an unexpected gentleness to that touch, as if he perfectly understood the leap of faith she had taken in traveling across half a continent to marry a stranger. Billy Thompson's home was simple, but it revealed the care of someone who tried to maintain his dignity even when life had taken away almost everything. The wooden planks were weathered but clean, and small vases of wildflowers decorated the windows, a feminine touch that persisted even after the absence of those who had placed them there. Catherine followed Billy to the porch, where the girls still hid behind the column. Up close, she could see better the details that the distance had smoothed out. Her blonde hair was matted, her dress needed repair, and there was a dirt stain on her small face that suggested hours of playing alone in the backyard. Billy stopped in front of his daughter, and Catherine noticed how he transformed in the child's presence. His shoulders straightened slightly, and a shy smile touched the corners of his mouth. It was as if the girl was the only ray of light that could still pass through the dark clouds that had settled in her life. The presentation was brief and clumsy. Billy mumbled his daughter's name, Emma, and explained that she had become very shy since her mother left. The word departed echoed in the warm afternoon air as a gentle euphemism for a pain that was still too great to name completely. Emma watched Catherine with big, serious eyes, blue as the desert sky in the late afternoon. There was a cautious curiosity in them, mixed with a need so deep as to be moving. The girl had grown up too fast in recent months, forced by circumstances to become independent in a way that no child should need. Catherine crouched slowly, placing herself at Emma's eye level. I had learned from the neighborhood children in Boston that sudden movements could frighten those who had already known a lot of fear. Her voice, when she finally spoke, came out softer than she intended, charged with an instinctive tenderness that she herself did not expect to feel so quickly. The interior of the house revealed more about the life Billy and Emma had built together in the difficult months. The kitchen was organized, but there was a visible economy in every corner. Patched dishes, furniture that had known better days, faded curtains that still fulfilled their role of filtering the intense light from outside. Emma followed Catherine and Billy through the rooms, always keeping a safe distance, but clearly interested in every move of the woman who had suddenly appeared in her small, orderly life. The girl had learned to be observant, a skill developed by those who need to quickly understand whether something new represents safety or danger. The room Billy had prepared for Catherine was at the end of the hall, small but clean, with a window overlooking the fields where a few cattle were lazily grazing. It was evident that he had made an effort to make the space welcoming. There were fresh flowers on the dresser, and the bedding smelled of homemade soap and sunshine. As Catherine arranged her few possessions, she could hear Billy talking quietly with Emma in the kitchen. His voice had infinite patience as it addressed his daughter, as if each word was carefully chosen so as not to cause more pain than life had ever imposed on the little soul. Their first meal together was an exercise in quiet diplomacy. Emma remained glued to her father's side, looking discreetly at Catherine between spoonfuls. The food was simple but tasty: beans, homemade bread, and dried meat seasoned with herbs that grew wild in the nearby fields. Catherine realized that Billy had learned to cook out of necessity, not natural talent. His movements in the kitchen were functional, without the fluidity of someone who was born for that task. It was further evidence of how he had needed to reinvent himself after the loss of his wife, taking on roles for which life had not adequately prepared him. After the meal, while Billy tended the animals in the barn, Catherine offered to help Emma get ready for bed. The girl hesitated, looking in the direction where her father had disappeared, as if she needed his approval to accept care from someone else. It was during this nightly ritual that Catherine began to understand the extent of the responsibility she had assumed. Emma didn't just need a new mother. She needed someone who could heal the invisible wounds left by the loss, who could give back to a 6-year-old the confidence that the world could still be a safe place. Emma's hair was more matted than it had initially appeared, and Catherine worked with infinite patience to undo the knots, whispering kind words whenever the brush met resistance. It was a simple act, but loaded with meaning, the first step in building a trust that would need to be earned day by day. When she finally put Emma to bed, Catherine realized how the girl's room still preserved traces of her previous maternal presence. A patchwork blanket that had clearly been made with love, some simple toys arranged with care, and on the dresser a small rag doll that showed signs of much affection and many tears. Emma nestled in bed like a wounded little bird, and Catherine had to resist the urge to pull her into a protective embrace. Intimacy would need to be built slowly, like all things true in that land where time moved differently, and trust was a luxury that few could afford to offer quickly. The first few days on Billy's property unfolded like a cautious dance between three people learning to share the same space. Catherine would wake up before dawn, accustomed to the rigid schedules of her previous life in Boston, and find Billy already tending to the animals in the corral. Emma appeared shortly after, always silent, watching the movements of the new woman in her house with the intensity of someone trying to decipher a mystery. Catherine had brought few domestic skills from her life in the city, but she possessed something more valuable, a quiet determination to make that new life work. She watched as Billy prepared meals, as he took care of the dirty laundry, as he tried to comb Emma's unruly hair every morning. There was an awkward tenderness to his every gesture, like a man trying to be two people at once. The first time Emma voluntarily approached Catherine was on a particularly hot afternoon, when the girl found the woman trying to repair a damaged fence near the house. Billy had gone out to check on the cattle in the distant fields, and Emma had been playing alone in the shade of the porch. Catherine struggled with the sturdy wires, her delicate hands unaccustomed to the heavy work of the ranch. Sweat ran down her face, and she stopped often to wipe her dirty hands on her already stained skirt. That's when she noticed the small shadow beside her, Emma watching her efforts with genuine interest. The girl said nothing, but picked up one of the tools that had fallen to the ground and sheepishly offered it to Catherine. It was a small gesture, but one that was loaded with meaning, the first sign that perhaps Emma was willing to accept help and, more importantly, to offer help as well. They worked together in silence for a few minutes, Catherine struggling with the fence and Emma arranging the tools scattered on the floor. The midday heat created an almost hypnotic atmosphere, where the only sound was the creaking of metal against metal and the distant hum of insects in the dry fields. It was during this moment of shared work that Emma finally spoke up. His voice was small and hesitant, as if words were fragile objects that could break if handled too tightly. She asked if Catherine knew how to make straw dolls, as her mother did on long winter afternoons. The question struck Catherine like a well-aimed arrow in the heart. She stopped working on the fence and looked at Emma, seeing for the first time not just a shy child, but a girl desperately longing for feminine traditions that she had lost along with her mother. Catherine admitted that she didn't know, but suggested that perhaps they could learn together. The idea of learning something new seemed to awaken something dormant in Emma. Her eyes lit up with a curiosity Catherine had not yet seen, and for the first time since her arrival, the girl smiled, a small, cautious but genuine smile. That evening, after Billy returned from the fields and they shared another silent meal, Catherine casually mentioned the conversation about the straw dolls. Billy stopped chewing and looked at Emma with an expression of surprise and relief. It was the first time in months that her daughter had shown interest in any activity that was not simply existing. Billy said that his wife had left some materials stored in a trunk in the attic, fabrics, thread, needles, and other belongings that he had not been able to find the courage to touch since she left. Maybe it was time to bring some of those things back into everyday home life. The next day, Catherine and Emma went up together to the dusty attic. The trunk was exactly where Billy had indicated, covered in a layer of dust that spoke of months of neglect. When Catherine lifted the lid, the smell of dried lavender escaped like a gentle ghost from the past. Emma approached the trunk with reverence, delicately touching the colorful fabrics her mother had collected over the years. There were scraps of old dresses, pieces of curtains that had decorated windows from previous houses, and small treasures that only made sense to those who had kept them with love. Catherine watched Emma explore those objects loaded with memory, noticing how the girl was navigating between the pain of longing and the joy of rediscovery. It was a delicate moment, one that required more sensitivity than any domestic skills Catherine might have learned in her previous life. Together, they selected materials for the first project, a simple doll that would serve as Emma's companion during lonely nights. Catherine had no experience with elaborate sewing, but she possessed nimble fingers and a determination that made up for her lack of technique. As they worked side by side in the living room, with the afternoon sun filtering through the faded curtains, Catherine realized that something fundamental was changing. Emma was no longer just observing, she was participating, suggesting details, laughing softly when Catherine made innocent mistakes. Billy found them like this when he returned from work in the late afternoon. Two figures bent over an ordinary design, surrounded by colorful patchwork and spools of thread. The look on her face was that of someone who had just witnessed a small miracle. Her daughter was playing again, and her house was starting to sound like home. The patchwork doll took shape over a week of dedicated work. Catherine and Emma spent their afternoons in the living room, sewing together while Billy took care of the ranch chores. The project became more than a simple activity. It was a bridge being built point by point, connecting two souls who had reached each other through different but equally painful paths. Emma had become more talkative during these sewing sessions. She told about her mother, about the stories they used to share, about the places where they played together in the fields near the house. Catherine listened to each word with reverent attention, understanding that she was being invited to know a sacred part of the girl's life. The doll got yellow wool hair, eyes embroidered with blue thread, and a dress made with the same fabric as one of Emma's mother's old dresses. Every detail was decided together, with Emma offering timid suggestions that Catherine welcomed with genuine enthusiasm. The girl was rediscovering her own voice through that act of shared creation. Billy watched these transformations with a mixture of gratitude and relief that he tried to hide behind his reserved nature. Catherine noticed how he relaxed when he got home and found the sounds of low talk coming from the living room. It was as if the music of domestic life was slowly returning to its home, filling spaces that had remained empty for too long. One afternoon, as they put the finishing touches on the doll, Emma asked a question that caught Catherine completely off guard. The girl wanted to know why Catherine had come so far to marry her father. The question was asked with the innocent curiosity of a child, but it carried the weight of someone who had already learned that important people could disappear without warning. Catherine paused her embroidery work and chose her words carefully. She explained about her lonely life in Boston, about how she had lost her own parents when she was young, about how she had responded to Billy's letter because she recognized in him someone who, like her, was trying to rebuild a life from the pieces that were left. Catherine's honesty seemed to touch Emma deeply. The girl was quiet for a long moment, processing this information with the seriousness of someone much older than her 6. When she finally spoke again, it was to admit that she had been frightened when she heard that a strange woman would come to live with them. Catherine understood this fear perfectly. She herself had felt terror throughout the train journey, imagining scenarios where her decision would turn out to be a terrible mistake. But now, sitting in that room, bathed in the golden light of the afternoon, working alongside this brave girl, Catherine knew she had made the right decision. The doll was ready on a Friday evening. Emma held her to her chest with an expression of pure joy, examining every detail with the care of one who receives a precious treasure. Catherine felt a surge of satisfaction that she hadn't experienced in years, the feeling of having created something truly important. Billy arrived home to find Emma playing on the living room floor with her new companion, making up elaborate stories and talking to the doll as if she were a long-lost friend. He stopped in the doorway, watching the scene with eyes that Catherine realized were moist with pent-up emotion. That night, after Emma went to bed cuddling with her new doll, Catherine and Billy sat on the porch to enjoy the cooler air at the end of the day. It was the first time they had been alone since her arrival, and they both seemed aware of the importance of this moment. Billy spoke of his wife, not with the sharp pain Catherine had expected, but with a gentle longing that acknowledged both the loss and the gratitude for the years they had had together. He told about how Emma had closed herself off after her mother's death, how he had felt completely lost, trying to be a father and mother at the same time. Catherine shared her own stories of loss and starting over, talking about the loneliness that had led her to respond to newspaper ads of men looking for wives. There was a vulnerability in this exchange of confidences that created between them an intimacy different from the one they had imagined when they exchanged formal letters through the mail. The conversation was interrupted by small footsteps from inside the house. Emma appeared at the balcony door, carrying her doll, and with an expression that mixed shyness and determination. She had woken up and, instead of going back to bed, had decided to look for the adults. Emma slowly approached Catherine, and for the first time since her arrival, the girl initiated voluntary physical contact. She leaned against Catherine's leg, still holding the doll, and lifted her face to look straight into the eyes of the woman who had brought back joy to her home. The question Emma asked at that moment would forever echo in Catherine's memory. In a small but firm voice, the girl asked if Catherine could be her new mommy. Not a replacement she had lost, but someone new who could love and care for her from then on. The silence that followed was charged with emotion. Catherine felt tears burn her eyes as she looked at that brave child who had found the strength to ask the most important question of her little life. Billy remained quiet, but Catherine could feel his quiet approval, his gratitude to see her daughter finally ready to accept love again. Tears streamed down Catherine's cheeks before she could even formulate an answer. She bent down to be at Emma's height, embracing the girl with a tenderness that had grown naturally in her heart over those weeks. The patchwork doll was squeezed between them, silent witness to a moment that would change their lives forever. Catherine's response came in the form of a whisper charged with emotion. She said yes, that she would love to be Emma's mother if the girl really wanted that. Not to replace the departed mom, but to create something new and special between them. Emma nestled into the embrace with a sigh of relief that seemed to carry months of built-up tension. Billy watched the scene with bright eyes, watching his daughter finally find the courage to accept love again, and his house truly become a home. The months that followed brought a gentle routine full of small joys. Catherine learned the rhythms of life on the ranch, while Emma flourished under the care of someone who had chosen to love her. Billy found that sharing responsibilities didn't diminish his role as a father, but it strengthened him. The sewing afternoons continued, now with new projects and more stories shared. Emma had found not only a new mother, but a companion who understood the importance of preserving memories while creating new ones. The wedding took place in a simple ceremony in the town's small church, with Emma carrying wildflowers and wearing a new dress made by Catherine's own hands. The patchwork doll took a place of honor in the front row, guarding the place of the one who had departed, but also celebrating those who had arrived. As the sun set over the golden fields of Cedar Falls, the Thompson family gathered on the porch to enjoy the end of another day. Catherine had found the purpose she was looking for. Billy had rediscovered the joy of a complete home, and Emma had learned that the heart has infinite room for new loves. The house that once echoed with silences now vibrated with laughter, conversation, and the soothing sounds of a family that had chosen each other. Fear had given way to trust. Loneliness had been replaced by companionship, and 3 lonely hearts had found their way home. Did you like this exciting story of the Wild West? Leave your like and subscribe to the channel for more narratives that touch the heart and awaken the soul.